High in the spine of the world, there are mountains that seem older than memory itself, their jagged peaks cutting through the sky like the teeth of some sleeping beast. Travelers who pass through the valleys at their feet often whisper of strange lights, of voices carried on the wind that speak in languages no man has ever written, and of shadows moving across ridges where no living thing could stand. I want to tell you the story of those mountains, a story that begins like a simple journey but grows into something no map can capture. Centuries ago, a group of wanderers sought passage through these peaks, drawn not by trade or conquest, but by a rumor that beyond the last wall of stone lay a valley where time itself bent differently. They were seekers of truth, pilgrims, scholars, and dreamers who had heard fragments of songs about a place where the stars touched the earth and silence carried answers. The people of the lowlands warned them not to go. Old shepherds spoke of travelers who never returned, of nights when the mountain sky pulsed with colors like the ocean at dawn, and of a sound like a great heartbeat echoing through the rock. Yet curiosity, stronger than fear, carried the group higher and higher, up trails that vanished into mist and snow, until the world below was nothing but a memory. On their third day, as they reached a pass between two towers of granite, they saw the first sign that the legends might be true. The air shimmered faintly, as though heat rose from invisible fire, though the wind was sharp with cold. Their guide, an old man who claimed his ancestors once lived among these peaks, grew pale and whispered that they had stepped into the mountain's breath. That night, as they camped near a frozen lake, they heard the sound of bells. Not the tinkling of goat herds, nor the clang of human craft, but a deep, resonant chime that rolled across the ice as though the mountain itself were speaking. One of the travelers, a young woman who studied the stars, swore she saw the surface of the lake move, not break or crack, but ripple, as if it were not solid at all. When she leaned closer, she claimed she saw constellations beneath the surface, glowing faintly, as if the night sky had sunk into the water. The others laughed nervously, telling her it was only reflection, but none of them slept. In the days that followed, the journey grew stranger. Paths that had been clear the night before would twist into new shapes by morning. A ridge they had crossed would vanish when they looked back, as if swallowed by the mountain. The air was heavy with silence, a silence so thick that even their footsteps seemed muted. Yet within that silence they began to hear things. A soft murmur like voices too far to understand, a low hum that vibrated in their bones, and sometimes the faint echo of their own names. One of the scholars wrote in his journal that he felt as though the mountain were watching them, testing their resolve. On the seventh day, when the moon rose pale and thin, they found a great stone arch standing in the snow. No hand had carved it. No chisel had shaped its perfect curve. It stood alone, a doorway leading nowhere, framed by two crumbling pillars etched with markings no one could read. As they drew near, the wind stilled, and the silence deepened until it pressed against their ears like weight. The old guide fell to his knees, trembling, and begged them not to pass through. He told them this was the gate of echoes, a threshold where the living and the forgotten met, and that no one who stepped beyond ever truly returned. But the travelers, driven by the hunger that had brought them this far, could not turn back. They lit their lanterns, held their breath, and stepped beneath the arch. The air shifted instantly. The snow no longer crunched beneath their boots. Instead, it seemed to sink soundlessly, like walking on soft sand. The stars overhead flared brighter, and the sky rippled faintly, as though it were a curtain instead of infinite space. Ahead of them stretched a valley none had seen before, glowing with a strange light that came from no sun or moon. And in the heart of that valley rose a mountain taller than all the rest, crowned with a pale fire that never flickered. The young woman whispered that they had found it, the place where the stars touched the earth. But even as wonder filled their hearts, an unease grew within them. For the valley was not empty. Shapes moved along the ridges, tall and slender, their outlines faint and shifting like smoke in the wind. And though no words were spoken, every traveler felt the same thought pressing into their minds. You should not have come here. They stood frozen beneath the impossible sky, the silence pressing on them like a hand against the chest. And though none of the shapes on the ridges moved closer, the travelers knew they were being weighed, measured, judged. The old guide would not step farther. He fell to the ground, his face buried in his hands, whispering prayers in a tongue older than the lowland villages. And when they tried to raise him, he cried out that to look upon the watchers was to lose one's soul. The young woman, whose eyes had first seen the constellations in the frozen lake, kept her gaze fixed on the tallest of the shifting figures, and later she would swear that the stars above bent ever so slightly around it, as though the night sky itself were leaning to listen. They pressed on, hearts hammering, through grass that glowed faintly with its own silver light and stones that hummed beneath their feet. Every sound of the valley seemed alive, the whisper of wind, the rustle of unseen streams, woven into a single chorus that pulsed with rhythm, like breathing. And then, at the center, they found the mountain crowned with fire. Its slopes were carved with paths that spiraled upward, but those paths shifted like smoke, never the same from one heartbeat to the next. Still, something pulled them upward, not with force, but with promise, a silent vow that what they sought lay at the summit. For 3 days they climbed, though they could not say if it was truly day or night, for the valley's light never dimmed nor grew. Time unraveled there. Moments stretched, hours folded, and none of them could remember when they had last eaten or slept. The scholar's journal, written in hurried strokes, began to lose coherence, lines repeating, words circling back as though his thoughts could not hold to a straight path. Yet the higher they climbed, the clearer the fire above became. It was not flame as they knew it, but a crown of pale radiance, soft and unburning, that seemed to pulse with the heartbeat they had heard since their arrival. And within that fire, they began to see shapes, faces, perhaps, or memories, not their own, but belonging to ages long past. At last they reached a plateau near the peak, where the air trembled with light, and there they found a circle of stone unlike anything in the world below. 12 pillars surrounded a basin filled not with water, but with liquid starlight, a pool that reflected no sky they knew. It glowed with constellations that shifted and rearranged as they watched, patterns forming that seemed like maps, or perhaps warnings. The young woman knelt and touched the surface, and in an instant she gasped as if struck, her eyes flooding with light. Through her lips poured words not her own, a voice that belonged to the mountain, or to the watchers above, or to something beyond even them. The voice told them that the mountains were not born of earth alone, but were the spines of a greater being, a guardian that lay sleeping beneath the world. Its dreams shaped the sky, its heartbeat guided the stars, and those who climbed too high, who crossed the gate of echoes, stepped into its dreaming. They were not meant to intrude, not meant to wake what slumbered there. Yet, the voice whispered, once in an age it allowed seekers to glimpse its truth, to test whether humanity was ready to carry the weight of knowing that the world they walked upon was alive, and that every stone, every storm, was part of a vast, breathing soul. The woman's eyes dimmed, and she fell unconscious, but the pool still shimmered with visions. Mountains rising and crumbling across endless time, rivers bending like veins, stars falling to seed new valleys. The travelers stood transfixed, torn between awe and dread. And then they heard it, the sound of steps, many steps, approaching across the plateau. The watchers had descended from the ridges, their shapes no longer distant smoke, but towering forms of light and shadow, faces indistinct, bodies bending like flame. And in a voice that was not spoken but thundered in their bones, they asked the travelers one question: will you remember, or will you forget? The travelers froze, the question reverberating in their minds like a drumbeat that could not be escaped. To remember would mean carrying the weight of what they had seen, the fire that crowned the peak, the starlit pool, the endless dreaming of the mountains themselves. To forget would be to return to the world below, to live as if nothing had happened, but with a void in their hearts where knowledge once burned. The old guide, still trembling on the ground, whispered that the mountain always gives a choice, but never twice. The young woman, still weak from the pool's touch, opened her eyes and spoke first. She said that she would remember, that the truth was too vital, too magnificent to let fade into ignorance. Slowly, one by one, the others agreed, though some hesitated, fearing the burden more than death itself. Then the watchers lifted their forms, dissolving into the light of the plateau, their presence retreating but leaving the mountain's pulse strong and steady. The pool's surface stilled, and for a heartbeat the travelers saw only themselves reflected, ordinary humans standing on an extraordinary summit. Then the fire at the peak flared once, a brilliant white that seared their vision, and everything changed. They were no longer climbing. They were descending, moving down paths that twisted differently than before, but the mountain did not resist. It guided them, as if letting them go only because they had accepted the gift. Days passed as they returned to the lowlands, though none could say if the time had been hours or weeks. The paths behind them vanished into mist, and the peaks themselves seemed taller, sharper, more alive. When they reached the villages, they found that no one had noticed their absence, that the world had continued as if they had never left. Yet in their hearts they carried the memory of the mountain's heartbeat. Each traveler changed in subtle ways. The scholar wrote in journals that no one could fully comprehend, texts filled with star maps that shifted across the pages, diagrams that suggested more than mathematics could describe. The young woman would gaze at the night sky for hours, recognizing constellations not by name, but by memory, speaking to stars as if they were old friends. The guide, who had once feared the mountains, spoke of them in quiet reverence, warning future seekers that the mountains were alive, that they dreamt, and that to climb them was to touch the pulse of something eternal. Over time, rumors spread, tales of travelers who returned from the peaks with knowledge no one else could grasp, whispers of strange lights in the sky above the mountains, voices in the wind that called the names of those who listened. But no one who had not seen the Gate of Echoes, who had not touched the starlit pool, could believe such stories. And so the mountains remained, silent to most, alive to a few, keeping their secrets in the heartbeat that echoes through the rock, waiting for the next seekers bold enough, or perhaps foolish enough, to cross the threshold. Even now, those who wander too close say they can hear it, a deep, steady pulse beneath the earth, a rhythm that belongs not to any one creature, but to the mountain itself. Some swear that if you listen closely, the heartbeat can call your name, test your courage, or perhaps, if you are patient and pure of intent, grant a glimpse of the truth beyond the world. Travelers leave gifts, small tokens, or prayers whispered into the wind, hoping to honor what they have touched, hoping that the mountain knows they mean no harm. And sometimes, when the night sky stretches wide and the wind is still, the light of the hidden valley flickers faintly on the peaks, reminding those who dare to climb that the mountains are awake, dreaming, and waiting. The travelers, now back among the familiar lowlands, could feel the mountains calling them still, not with words, but with a subtle tug at their hearts, a reminder that they had glimpsed something eternal. Years passed, yet none could forget the Gate of Echoes, the starlit pool, or the watchers whose presence had pressed so heavily upon their souls. They realized that the mountain's gift was not merely knowledge, but awareness, a reminder that the world is larger, stranger, and far older than humanity can imagine. Some spoke of it in hushed tones around fires, careful to veil what they had truly seen, while others recorded what they could in secret journals, maps, and sketches, fragments of the truth scattered like seeds. The young woman continued to study the stars, her nights filled with conversations no one else could hear, mapping patterns that seemed to guide her steps. The scholar wandered distant lands, seeking mountains that might echo the one they had left behind, though none ever did. And the guide, who had once feared the peaks, became a keeper of stories, quietly steering those who sought adventure toward respect, patience, and humility. Generations later, travelers still whisper about the mountains that pulse and dream, about lights that shift across ridges, and about voices that call the names of those who listen closely. Those who climb with pure hearts may feel the rhythm beneath their feet, a deep, steady heartbeat that reminds them of something larger, something eternal, something alive. The mountains endure, guarding their secrets, shaping the wind, and dreaming their slow, endless dream. And perhaps, just perhaps, if you are brave enough to follow the hidden paths and patient enough to listen, you too may hear the heartbeat, feel the pull, and glimpse the truth beyond the stars. A truth that changes not only how you see the mountains, but how you see the world itself. The peaks remain, silent and waiting, eternal watchers of those who wander, and eternal guardians of mysteries that no human eye can fully contain.